I mean, it's easy to see why you were attracted to this story. You talked a bit about at the beginning of the film about it as the morality of the piece. It's about adventure and human endeavour. It's about tragedy. It's about, you know, finding the truth in that story. How did you find a way into it, or what was the hook that got you wanting to make this film?
It started very soon after the actual events, which is I remember at the time literally thinking, this is far too soon, you know, but 4 years on, with a little bit of perspective on it. It's like everything, but it was slightly different. When Pat Falvey, one of the executive producers, came to me with the story, he was a friend of Jer's. He climbed on Everest. I think you saw him there. He talked about that in the film. At the time, it was more Pemba hadn't gotten any recognition. The Sherpas in the world media hadn't got any recognition whatsoever for what had happened on the mountain. And Pemba had done all this amazing work up in the mountain, but it had kind of been almost written everything. But quite soon after that, he did get acknowledged as Adventure of the Year by National Geographic. So it's kind of hard to say he didn't get any recognition whatsoever after that. So. But once we started investigating the story, it came to light what had happened, or the mystery that kind of surrounded Ger McDonald's last movement. So, and that seemed like fascinating. And it's like everything. Mark Monroe, who worked with me on this, he's a very talented writer. He wrote a film called The Cove. I don't know if anyone saw that. We were attracted as well because it was the theme of stories. It was all about stories. Everybody had a story, and none of them necessarily completely tallied, and that's apparently that's quite common at altitude, because for the effects that altitude put on people. But that fascinated me in that, it is a kind of thing where one person thinks it happened because of this, and another person thinks it happened because of that. And it was also, when I heard the story first, it was all ice cut the ropes and that they were stranded on the rope, and it's still complicated. I mean, it's a really complicated story to tell, but it really wasn't the same. What was reported in the papers wasn't really what happened at all. You know what I mean? And it's just a question of that. And then what happens is it gets reported, and then the media moves on, and then the truth comes out, and nobody's there to listen to it. Yeah. So it was really to bring that to light.
But you're there to listen to it. You're there to want to tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really. I think it's very easy. It's very difficult to kind of explain sometimes that you forget sometimes when you work for so long on something that there's real people involved in this film. One of the climbers is over here, Frederick. Jer's family, I think, are in the audience here, a lot of them. So it was very difficult. I mean, to try and deal with the issues, or what had happened to Jer, to try and bring all that up with with all the other people. I mean, with Cecilia Skog, with you know what I mean. It's an awful tragedy, yeah. And it was very, very difficult to just initially get all that information down first, and that's when. And once we had that, then we started to try and craft how the film would be played.
And we will take questions very, very soon. But I just did want to touch on the technical aspects of the film, because sure. There's so much ambition in it. I say you use recreations, archive footage. All the interviews, still photography, Would you talk a bit about piecing all that together, and maybe you could both say something about that?
Sure. Well, initially, I mean, it always became apparent there was an amount of archive material that was shot by climbers who on the Mountain Ger had done some Frederick Strang and Wilco van Rooyen were the three really main sources of footage from that. But when all the literally once the summit, once they'd summited and started coming down, and things started going really badly. I mean, pretty much the cameras went in, so there wasn't anything to really kind of document that. So we needed to find some way of, because it's important in the story to try and show what happens in there. So my approach was to try not to be sensations about it, because it is real. It's very, very real, and you have to be aware of that. I had to be aware of that. So. Maybe Ben, you want to jump in on that one there, in terms of cutting?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to strike a balance between telling a story that is hopefully enthralling, illuminating, challenging in both its confusions and its clarities at different points, and with actually portraying journalistically the reality as we understand it of what passed, which is, as Nick's been saying, quite a fluid thing in a story like this. So you're trying to balance all of those elements, which is why it has this elliptic form of backing up on itself, because if you tell it in a straight fashion, you'd be a long way in before anything really that you're going to take a hold of and is going to mean something is going to really resonate, which in itself creates a whole load of problems, because then you're starting in the middle and going to the end and jumping around, and that's a challenge in a factual in a documentary. The textures, the different footage, I mean, to be honest, that's a joy and a privilege to have so many different perspectives, so many different forms with which to try to craft the story. And Nick managed to find them all.
Certainly did, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few elements. I mean, there was, photographic sources, and then there was reconstructions which we kind of shot in the relative safety of the Eiger in comparison to K2. You just couldn't go there. I mean, I had a small crew of us flew out to K2 then and did a Cineflex shoot, which is where you get a lot of the aerial shots of K2, and it's absolutely incredible, and it helped to understand, by the way, why people would go there, because it is an astonishing place. The interviews, the interviews with Wilco, the Dutch climber, took place in November 2008, so it was very soon after the tragedy. I think his interview is very raw, and you can see that there's a lot of he's searching for answers himself, even in the interview. And then other interviews took place as over a period. I think the last interviews were really in January 2011. So in some cases they hadn't actually told their stories necessarily before. In some cases they did, I guess. All you kind of try and do is you try and put down a question of, it is very difficult asking somebody to, it's a bit like, isn't it, Neil Armstrong, what was it like to walk on the moon? I mean, how do you really answer that in one of those things? Sorry?
From the interviews, from being on the other side of doing the interviews, but spending a lot of time working very systematically and carefully through them, it often strikes me that there's a kind of catharsis that can be in having several hours of undiluted time to tell in a non-judgmental fashion. You're not being judged by the people, by Nick and the people with Nick filming, to talk through their side of the story. And there are moments, with many of them in the film, where I believe in watching them that there are realizations or trains of thought which perhaps hadn't been vocalized fully to that point, which is part of why even when some of the interviews are several years after the event, they are very immediate and very real. And that's a slightly strange maybe sometimes from the outside, but it's quite often something that I find viewing interviews on these kind of things. There is something which is rewarding and comforting in telling your side of the story without having a whole load of other voices coming in, because that's what the majority of the media is lots of people coming in and they know what they want, as opposed to you just answering the questions in your own good time in whichever way you want to answer them.
I know. I mean, the truth in that is it is weird, because initially I couldn't understand why anybody would take a 1 in 4 chance at getting to the summit of K2. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you will die, but I mean, it is a 1 in 4 chance. That is the statistics of K2. It is a savage mountain. But after spending initially I was going to just rely on everybody else's footage, but when you do as much research and work into this kind of thing, I felt I couldn't actually make this without actually at least seeing K2, whether I trekked in and filmed it from the base. But I kind of had an ambition to let's do it and let's just fly in and do this from the air. And I had a very dedicated team came to Pakistan with me for that, and it was an adventure. But it also gave me a huge insight into why, these guys go there, because it is you've been in K2, so it's astonishing. It is. I don't know how many people here really want to go climb mountains or are just interested in climbing mountains, but it is astonishingly beautiful, and it does change your perspective when you see it.